Okay, guys, welcome back. This is Washington, D.C., the tour of monuments and other famous attractions. This is part two because my part one, which I was only planning on doing one part, but I had so much information to share that it got a little long. So I'm cutting it into two different sections. Okay, so we went through a lot of memorials while we went through part one. So if you didn't do part one, you might want to check it out. It talks about a lot of really cool memorials there on the mall and in other places as well. But we are going to go through some other attractions. Arlington National Cemetery is actually really interesting. It is across the river. You can see the Washington Monument here in the background. But the Arlington National Cemetery is it's a cemetery. There are up to 30 funerals a day here, still happening. So the first burial happened in 1864. And this land was at one time the home of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. So it was confiscated from him during the Civil War, and it is now a national cemetery. So there are tons and tons of graves here in Arlington National Cemetery. It is a cemetery for military members. So that's how you would, if you had a desire to be buried there, you would have to be part of the military. But they do put, for national holidays and things, they do put a small American flag next to every grave. It's an amazing sight to see how many graves there are. It's pretty breathtaking when you go there. This is the home of where Robert E. Lee once lived. His wife, Mary Anna Randolph Custis, inherited the property, and then Robert E. Lee, when he married her, it became his property as well. This is the Arlington House, and it was made during the Civil War into a headquarters for the Union Army, and then eventually became it's now, I mean, you can go into it, it's like a museum now. But from the front steps of that, you can actually see the Washington Monument. One of the main features in Arlington National Cemetery is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is guarded 24 hours a day by the 3rd Infantry Regiment, which is also known as the Old Guard. They've made this is a tomb, and it is made of marble from Colorado. The tomb contains remains of service members from both World Wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and they're unknown. So they don't have the identity of those people that have been buried there. They did at one point, interesting fact, they did do a DNA sample of the member that was from the Vietnam War, and they actually were able to positively identify that person. So they were able to return the remains of that soldier to his family. But the thought behind this is that there are members of the military that go missing in action, or are their families don't know, where their remains are. So this is a place where if you don't know where your loved one is, then you can come here, and that this is a place to honor them. So it is guarded 24 hours a day. There is an amazing ceremony called Changing of the Guard, and it's fantastic. It happens every hour. So they switch off, and the person that guards the tomb paces in front of it. And so this tomb is guarded 24 hours a day. So even when the National Cemetery closes for the day, they still have people patrolling, and they still do the same ceremony. But it's pretty incredible to see this changing in the guard. John F. Kennedy, who was another president, he was actually assassinated in 1963 when he was in Dallas. And this is where his gravesite is. And so you can see up in the background, Arlington House is up there. But this is the grave of John F. Kennedy. And there is a flame here. It's called the Eternal Flame. It never goes out. And this was the design of his um, of his grave. And the flagstones here are from Cape Cod, kind of up where he is from. And he's one of only 2 presidents that are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. William Howard Taft is the other one. He died back in 1930. So John F. Kennedy is buried here. His wife, Jackie Kennedy, who didn't die till much later, but she is also buried next to him. So there are 2, her grave is there as well. They also had 2 children who died in infancy when they were babies. So Patrick is one of their children, and then they had a daughter who also passed away. So their graves are there as well. There are some other Kennedy family members that are buried there, buried near here, but not in this actual site. JFK's brother, Robert Kennedy, was also assassinated a couple years after JFK. He was assassinated in 1963. He's also there at Arlington. And then their brother, Edward Kennedy, was buried there, near there as well. He died in 1994. So, or nope. Yes. No, hang on. 2009, I believe. Yes. So, sorry. Jackie Kennedy was buried there in 1994 when she passed away. And then Edward Kennedy, the brother, he passed away, and they buried him nearby in 2009. Sorry, got my dates mixed up. There's also an amphitheater here, and this is the area kind of right before you get to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and they do have some gatherings there. So that's another really cool part of this cemetery. So even though, sometimes people think about cemeteries as being, I don't know, people probably have all sorts of ideas about cemeteries. This cemetery is full of history, and there's a lot of really interesting things to see. But yes, still a somber place, and a place to be respectful and remember those that died. The next one we're going to go to is the Supreme Court building. The Supreme Court building is really cool. It's actually a lot newer than it looks. It looks like an old Greek structure. It was built, not super recently, but it was built recently enough that it looks older than it is. So it has these bronze doors at the front, which are really hard to see right there. They weigh 6.5 tons. So they weigh 13,000 pounds each, which is amazing. The Great Interior Hall, you can see, even this is the Great Interior Hall, and even that looks, old and beautiful. They got the marble that they used here from a couple of different places, from Alabama, from Georgia, Vermont, and then also from out of the United States. They got some from Italy and Spain as well. Fun fact about this building, on the 5th floor, they have a basketball court, and it's sometimes kiddingly called the highest court in the land. The Supreme Court in general, like as an idea, is the highest court in the land because it's, the most important one, and it makes like really final decisions. So they call it the highest court in the land, but then they also kiddingly, like as a nickname, call the basketball court on the 5th floor the highest court in the land, kind of as a joke. This is the inside. The justices sit up here. So you have the associate justices and the chief justice. Inside here, there are no cameras allowed and things like that when they're in session. And it's a very formal place, and they decide some very serious cases here. So that's where the Supreme Court is. That's what the chamber looks like. This is a really cool staircase in the Supreme Court. It has this oval spiral to it. It's beautiful. It almost looks like an optical illusion. So this is in the Supreme Court building as well. The Capitol building, which is actually, the Supreme Court building is right behind the Capitol building. So they're neighbors. This is kind of an interesting history here. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had a contest, and the winning architectural design would win a whopping $500. So, but back then, mind you, $500 is a lot. basically what ended up happening was they didn't like any of the ideas, so they ended up accepting an idea from a man named William Thornton. Um, Unlike some of the other places in Washington D.C., like the Lincoln Memorial, there with the symbolism of the columns and things, the Capitol building doesn't have any symbolism attached to that. They just used the number that they needed to make it stable. So that people often ask if there's symbolism with that. This is the other piece of this with the history of it. This was also the second building that was the other building that was burnt down during the War of 1812. But other interesting fact, right after they set fire to it, there was a huge, huge rain shower. So much of the fire for the White House and the Capitol building was put out, which made the damage a little less severe because of the rain. And it took about 4 years for them to repair some stuff. But when they did repair it, they were able to add some cool stuff to it because they kind of realized that they were in need of some other places. And as the government kind of grew, they were able to add on to this because of the fire in 1812. They've built this visitor center. Now it's hard to see here, but it's actually right under here. The visitor center is under here, and it is beautiful. There are about 3 million visitors that come here every year. They took a ton of dirt out of what was right here to then build this visitor center that is basically underground because you've got all the Capitol building there. They didn't want to destroy the view and the outside appearance of the Capitol, but they did want to provide a visitor center so for all the visitors that do come to the Capitol building. So that being said, when they made this, they took 65,000 truckloads of soil out of this area to then build our what we know now as the visitor center. So when you walk into the visitor center, this is what it looks like. You can see all the people here waiting to go in. This is a model of the statue that is actually on top of the Capitol building. And when you go in, there are some theaters here where you can, there's like a 13-minute video that you watch. Talks about the history of the Capitol building and that kind of stuff. So that's what the visitor center looks like on the inside. If you look up, they have this beautiful glass ceiling, and you can see the dome and the rotunda area of the Capitol building, and then you can see that same statue up top. When you finally get into the Capitol building, you get to see some really cool stuff. So this is one of the things. This is the rotunda. It's very famous. There's a painting up here at the top, George Washington here in the middle, and then there's people up here, and they are supposed to represent the 13 colonies. So there's some cool stuff here with the rotunda. So that's what it looks like when you're looking straight up in the rotunda. This is what the rest of the rotunda looks like from the walls. So like if you were standing here and looking straight up, this is what the area under the rotunda looks like. There are a series of paintings around here that have all sorts of history with the United States. Some of them have to do with the signing of the Constitution. Other ones have to do with other historic moments in U.S. history. This is called Statuary Hall. This used to be part of where they had, meetings with like the Senate and the House, and they had where the we currently have Senate chambers and House chambers. These smaller rooms were used for those at one time. So this is it's a half dome. So instead of that full dome that the rotunda has, this is a half dome. And there are 2 statues from each state in here. And then there are also some of the statues. If we go back to the rotunda, there are a couple of statues inside the rotunda, but then there are others that are kept here in the Statuary Hall. So each state is allowed to have two statues, and it's up to them which people they represent in their statues. The largest statue in Statuary Hall, fun fact, is, and I'm not very good at pronouncing this man's name. His name is King Kamehameha, and he was the ruler of Hawaii before he became a state. His statue is 9 feet 10 inches tall. And it weighs about 15,000 pounds. So these statues are pretty big. He's the biggest one, but they are all very big, very heavy statues. This part of the Capitol building is called the Crypt. It's actually directly below where the Rotunda is, and these big pillars here are holding up all the stuff above it. So they're very important. It's called the Crypt because the plan was to originally have George Washington buried here, but George Washington decided he wanted to be buried at Mount Vernon. So there is a crypt in there, but he is not buried in there. This is the Senate chamber. So this is where all the senators do their stuff and have all their meetings and make their votes. There are 100 senators, and you can see their desks and their chairs all arranged here so that they can all see the center area. So when they have speeches or make votes and announcements, that's the Senate chamber. This is the House chamber. It's larger because there are more members. There are 535 voting members in the House. And so it is much larger. There's actually a viewing area up above, up here. So if people are watching, they can watch from there. There are some monuments that are outside the Capitol building. This is the Garfield Monument, named after President Garfield. And he was actually assassinated in 1881. But this was a monument dedicated to him. It's outside the Capitol building. You can see it in the background. Another one that's outside the Capitol building is the Peace Monument. So this is the Peace Monument. And it's just a beautiful monument that's sitting out there. And it has a lot of symbolism to it as well. Trying to look at my time. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this one, but it's neat. It has grief holds her covered face against the shoulder of history. So kind of what I talk about a lot with history, and that there are a lot of things that are really sad in history, and we need to learn about them so that we don't ever let those things repeat themselves. So I always think this one's interesting because there's definitely some grief in history. There's some things that have happened that haven't been positive. So learning from that and hoping that they never ever repeat themselves. So that's the Peace Monument. The Ulysses S. Grant Memorial is right here. It's a little hard to see, but he is sitting on a horse, and it is really big. It is 44 feet high from the bottom to the top up here, and it's very gigantic. And President Grant, U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, he is sitting on top of his horse there. The Washington Monument. All right, super cool, dedicated to Washington. And it's interesting. It's a little tricky to see in this picture, and if you listen to the history of DC, during the Civil War, the construction of this actually stopped. So right about here, you can see there's a different coloration of the stone because they actually ended up quarrying it from a different space after the war. So they stopped building, and then when they started building, the stone is slightly different in color. And around the outside, you can see all these flags. There is an elevator that goes straight to the top. No, you don't have to climb stairs. It is 555 feet tall. Pretty amazing. It was completed in 1884. At that point, it was the tallest building. And then it was eventually passed up by the Eiffel Tower. And then it is still to the tallest structure in Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. doesn't have a ton of like skyscrapers and things like that. So the Washington Monument is still the tallest in Washington, D.C. So the plans for the monument actually happened even before Washington was elected for president, which is kind of an interesting thing. The original design had a lot of other stuff on it. But then they eventually simplified it down to this really tall, it's actually called an obelisk, that became popular in Egypt, ancient Egypt. So this is an obelisk. As you go up the elevator, there are these amazing plaques that line the walls, and the wall of the elevator is glass, so you can see them as you go up the elevator. So each state has one. This one is Ohio. Now, the observation deck. So when you this is why you're going up there, is to go to this observation deck. There are some windows. They're small, And then there is a view from each side. So this is what it would look like when you're poking your head through. And yes, it's glass. You can't look through or can't get through or anything. It's very safe. It's a very small window, and it does not open. So it's very safe. If you were to look out the Washington Monument to the west, this is what you would see. You got the Lincoln Memorial back there. And then if you were to look east, you see the Capitol building way over here. And you can see all the monuments, or not the monuments, the museums that line this. If you look toward the north, you see the White House. And if you look towards the south, here is the Jefferson Memorial with the tidal basin right there. All right, moving on to the White House. So the White House is fascinating. There is the front view, and this is the back view of the White House. This is the front view of the White House. Again, it was caught on fire in 1812, and then they did rebuild it. As of 2019, the White House had 6 levels, 412 doors, 147 windows, 28 fireplaces, 8 staircases, and 3 elevators. And if you wanted to paint the outside of the White House, it would take 570 gallons of white paint to paint the outside. Pretty amazing. Every president has lived here except for George Washington. John Adams was the first one. And then there was a brief period where no one lived in the White House because they were repairing it after the War of 1812 fire. So in August 24th of 1814 was when the White House was lit on fire by the British troops when they invaded DC. The fire did go out pretty quickly because there was a very large rainstorm. But because Dolly Madison, husband of James Madison, knew that this was happening, or she got wind of the fact that the British were coming and was worried about the safety of the White House. And so to save this very famous portrait painting of George Washington, she actually saved it, took it off the wall and took it with her. So the reason that we have this painting is because Dolly Madison ended up saving it. And this portrait actually hangs in the East Room. And this is the East Room. The East Room is a place where they have dances and receptions and press conferences and ceremonies and all sorts of stuff. It's a large room, kind of like a big ballroom. This is the Oval Office. Each president gets to design the Oval Office any way they want in terms of rugs and things like that. So that they do get to customize that as well. This was an addition when they added and built the West Wing in 1909. And they got the idea about the shape of this room from the Blue Room, which we'll see in just a second. So the design, there's the Blue Room. So the Blue Room is also oval in shape. And they had it built, or it was built because it was just a way to have some receiving lines, meaning like the way that a line of people that would greet the president and things like that. So it was an easy way to have that happen. But this is the Blue Room. Next to that is the Red Room. And it has served as a parlor, a music room, and some presidents in recent times have had small dinner parties in it. This is the Green Room, same kind of thing. It's a place where they can gather with small groups. This is kind of a cross section of what the White House looks like here. So you can see you've got Green Room, Blue Room, Red Room, and all of that stuff. So you can kind of see a cross section of what the White House looks like. On those upper floors, that's going to be the president's private quarters. So people wouldn't actually go there. This is the White House bowling alley. It only has 1 lane, and it actually says White House Bowl up here on the top. It was built as a birthday gift for President Truman in 1947. But yeah, they have a bowling alley in there. So if you're president, you can have a bowling alley in your house. They also have a movie theater here. So they get to see movies there. Pretty cool. It holds 42 people in their movie theater. They also have a basketball court. So here is a picture. I think both of these are President Obama shooting hoops out on the basketball court. Now to a different kind of house that happens to be white as well. This is Mount Vernon. This is the home of George Washington. He lived there from 1754 until he died in 1799. And this house was about 10 times the average home size in colonial Virginia. So this was a mansion at the time. And it's absolutely beautiful. You can see the Potomac River in the background. It is a place where he and Martha Washington lived. And it was passed down through George Washington's family for a time, and then the Mount Vernon Ladies Association actually purchased it from George Washington's great grandnephew in 1858, and then it has since become a museum. So this is the back part of Mount Vernon, and looks out onto the Potomac River. It does have a full basement, and if you've watched National Treasure, no, there are no secret passages leading from it, but this is what their basement looks like. This is where George Washington is actually buried. So even though people wanted him to be buried in the Capitol building, he wanted to be buried here in his own home. So this is Mount Vernon and his tomb here. This is also another view of Mount Vernon from afar. And they do have a full museum there in Mount Vernon, and it has all sorts of interesting things. It does have George Washington's teeth, his fake teeth, and it has all sorts of other things in it as well, things about the Revolutionary War and things like that. So that is Mount Vernon. And I think we're going to take a break and go to part 3. So if you want to check out part 3, it has some really cool stuff in it. We've got the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, the FBI building, and all sorts of other stuff. So check it out. All right. Thanks.